Working the night shift at the bakery was usually a fairly peaceful experience. It could sometimes feel a bit creepy, but we usually had a good laugh and listened to music as we worked. The shop closed early in the evening, and only two of us remained, my colleague Sean and me. Our shift began at 9 p.m. and stretched through the dark hours until 6 a.m. It was just us, the industrial ovens and fryers, and the rhythmic hum of the mixers. That night, like many others, we started prepping the dough for the next day's produce. The shop's windows were concealed by steel shutters, and there was only one door leading to the back alley, where we would sometimes take smoke breaks or just grab some fresh air. While we toiled away on the pastries and bread, the shop remained locked up and quiet up front. Around midnight, the stillness was interrupted by an unusual sound. The shop's phone began ringing, which was unusual on the night shift. Who could be calling at this hour, especially with the shop closed? I picked up the receiver, but there was nothing but silence on the other end. I assumed it was a wrong number and hung up, returning to my duties. About an hour later, my colleague Sean yelled out that he was stepping outside for a smoke break. He propped open the back door, and I could hear him watching videos on his phone as he lit a cigarette. As I continued to knead dough and shape loaves, the realization of how alone I was suddenly settled in. I turned up my music, knowing I was just being paranoid. About 10-15 minutes later, I heard the back door creak open. Assuming it was Sean returning from his smoke break, I called out, "Hey man, everything okay?" To my relief, he responded with a and I got back to my work, with the sounds of the kitchen and the soft music filling the space. After a few moments, I heard Sean in the other room, clicking the restroom door shut. I was just about to call out to him when the phone rang again. I hesitated before answering, but picked up after a couple of rings. It was Sean. His voice sounded tense as he explained that he was outside and that he'd left his keys behind when he went out for a smoke. My heart pounded as I peered round at the restroom door. If Sean was outside, then who was this inside the restroom? Panic took off as I opened the back door to let Sean in, explaining quietly what was going on. I could tell from his wide-eyed expression that he saw the panic on my face, and as I fumbled for my phone to dial 911, Sean grabbed a rolling pin from the counter. In unison, we inched towards the restroom, the tension thickening in the air. There were muffled sounds emanating from behind the restroom door. Whoever was inside seemed to be looking around for something and muttering quietly. With trembling hands, Sean wedged a chair under the restroom door handle. It was a flimsy barricade, but it would buy us a little time as we waited outside for the police to arrive. The ordeal felt like an eternity, but it was only a matter of minutes before 2 police cars pulled up to the bakery. We opened the shutters, and the officers approached from the front door, guns drawn. They announced themselves to the intruder and pushed open the restroom door. A man emerged with a demented look on his face, apologizing over and over, but in one hand holding a massive butcher's knife. Before he could react, an officer tased him, dropping him to the floor, where he was handcuffed and led out of the bakery. In the aftermath, we could only conclude that the intruder had broken in, likely assuming that someone was working alone, waiting in the restroom for an opportunity to make his move. If Sean hadn't forgotten his keys and called me at that exact moment, the outcome could have been very different. Our boss had cameras installed at the back door, and me and Sean still worked the night shift together, fortunately without any further unexpected visitors. I had been working as a security guard for these 2 empty buildings on an old industrial estate for a few months now. The site was scheduled for demolition, standing as grim relics of the past. Most nights were uneventful. I'd make my rounds, ensure the premises were secure, and mostly tried to keep myself entertained to stay awake. There were occasional intrusions from kids, but they usually just wanted to sneak in for some late night graffiti or a sly smoke. It was never a big deal, and there was nothing of real value inside. As I say, it was mostly quiet and fairly routine. One chilly autumn night, however, that changed. I was in the van, going through my usual routine of checking the building's perimeter, when I noticed a faint beam of light flickering from one of the windows in the building across from me. I leaned forward, squinting at the distant glow. The place was supposed to be empty, and I knew there was no legitimate reason for anyone to be in there. I turned the van round and sped over to the other building. It was just a minute's drive through the dimly lit car park. As I arrived, a group of kids bolted from the building's entrance, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't bother giving chase. I figured it was the same old story. Some local teens trying to get a thrill out of exploring a spooky old building. I figured to do a quick patrol to make sure the place was properly secure. With my flashlight in hand, I approached the entrance and noticed something out of place. A metal panel that had been securely fastened was cut and bent back, revealing how those kids had probably gained access. I snapped some photos with my phone. I'd need them to log the incident and to send a report to my manager. After bending the panel back the best I could, I made my way inside. The building was just as I expected, the usual vague eeriness in the half-light. I walked around for about 10 or 15 minutes, looking for signs of any damage, but saw nothing. Satisfied that the place was now secure, I headed back towards the main entrance. But then, as I reached the door, I heard a distinct creaking sound, as though someone was shifting their weight behind me. My heart pulsed and I turned around sharply, my flashlight beam looking for any movement. That's when I saw a man crouched behind a stack of wooden crates, trying to hide just a few feet away from me. We locked eyes, and I could see the fear and desperation in his. He was shirtless and had numerous cuts all over his body. I knew I had to remain calm and look after the building, so I took a step towards him and said, "Hey, you can't be here, you need to leave." The man just continued to stare at me, his wide, bloodshot eyes never leaving mine. Then out of nowhere, as if he recognized the futility of resisting, he sprang to his feet and darted straight towards me. It was a blur. His wild, ragged form streaked past me as he shoulder first crashed through the ground floor window, shattering it into 1,000 pieces before running off into the night. I called the police immediately, feeling my heart still racing. They arrived shortly after and we combed the area for evidence, but it led to nothing. The intruder had escaped, leaving behind nothing but adrenaline and unanswered questions. From that night on, the company I worked for decided that it wasn't safe to have one guard working alone, so I had a new partner on my night shifts. It was a precaution, but a welcome one, and it made the building's patrols a little less nerve-wracking, just in case those buildings weren't quite as empty as we expected them to be. I work as an electrician, and I was working nights on a construction site of a brand new department store. The building loomed in the dark, an empty shell awaiting its grand opening. Rain pelted the large glass windows, seemingly the only sound in the silence. I had been working for hours, inspecting electrical installations across the whole site, making sure everything was in order for the upcoming opening, when the peaceful silence was broken. I could hear the approaching low rumble of a car engine outside. I looked out of the window and there was a car pulling into the parking lot. There was a Wendy's and a couple of other food places just a stone's throw away, and my first thought was that someone had taken a wrong turn, looking for some late night food. But the car didn't turn back round. It stopped, with 3 men getting out, their forms illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlights. They stood there for a moment, and I felt a twinge of worry. The building I was in and the construction site were shut down for the night. But maybe they were just lost, looking for somewhere to eat or stretch their legs. Who knows? I tried to shake off my unease and continued my work, not giving it much thought. And then around 10 minutes later, there was a sound that made me freeze. A loud metallic banging echoed through the building, and I could feel my heart take off immediately. It was coming from the service entrance door, and obviously there should be no one there at this time, especially not in a store that wasn't due to open for weeks. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the eerie quiet. My senses on high alert, I reached the door. The banging had ceased, but through the small window, I could see one of the men from the parking lot peering inside. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and swung it open, asking what was going on. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man seemed taken aback, stuttering as he formed a reply. He claimed to be alone and having car trouble, and he asked if I could assist him. My memory, however, was sharp. I'd seen 3 men get out of that car earlier. The man's story didn't add up. Suspicion gnawed at me, and I told him sternly that he should leave, warning that I'd call the police if he stayed. Then I locked the door, watching him retreat to his car. I returned to my work, but couldn't concentrate. My thoughts were a whirlwind. What was going on out there? Why had 3 men turned up to a construction site in the middle of the night? My unease refused to be silenced, and I finally decided to text my colleague Mike, even though it was late. He responded straight away that he would come down to check on me. An hour passed slowly, the rain still droning on, and my nerves remained on edge. Then another sound pierced the night, an engine approaching the service entrance. I assumed it was Mike arriving, finally bringing some relief to the anxiety. I headed towards the door, relieved at the thought of seeing my colleague, but when I got there and looked out, my relief transformed into sheer terror. It wasn't Mike who had arrived, it was the same 3 men from earlier. They were back, and this time they were attempting to break the lock on the service entrance. Panic welled up inside me, and I darted back into the nearby utility room. I locked the door and called 911. My voice quivered as I explained the dire situation to the dispatcher. Next, I called Mike's number again, but it was just dialing out. My ears were ringing with the surging adrenaline as I heard the relentless pounding on the door continue. The situation was escalating, and I was trapped with no means of defending myself apart from a few tools. The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. The pounding on the door showed no signs of relenting. I was a mere spectator with only a torque wrench in my hand and a sinking feeling that help might not arrive in time. Then I heard a commotion outside the door, shouting, scuffling and confusion. I couldn't discern the words, but it was clear that my colleague had arrived and was confronting the intruders. Finally, someone else was here to help make sense of the nightmarish situation. I unlocked the door and flung it open, ready to back up my colleague Mike in whatever way I could. He was out there, indeed confronting the 3 men, but there was no sign of the police. I ran over to join him in the chaos, with only my wrench in my hand, yelling that I'd already called the cops. But the men took off, scrambling into their car and speeding off into the night, leaving us in a state of shock. We sat outside for 20 minutes, catching our breath and trying to calm ourselves down, none the wiser as to who those guys were. We did a lap of the building, double-checking doors and windows to ensure it was secure. The police arrived about an hour later, long after the assailants had disappeared. There was little evidence to work with, just a damaged lock, and the eerie feeling of a threat still lingered. However, they said they would add the area to their nightly patrol for a few weeks, just to make sure that nobody returned. I'd often complained about how mundane the night shift could be, but that night caught me well off guard. It somehow felt like a lucky escape, but I'm still not sure from what.